I'm not sure how I exactly want to say what I want to say, but the basic notion here is that you have no way to check your biases. So things can be put forward to be, objective research and what have you, when they're really just biased, narrative driven bullcrap. And the result is more shitty science, as it were. And the result of more shitty science is perhaps a more precipitous drop off in public trust in science. And hence the reason I've been concerned about this for a long, long time. And the postmodernist woke crap in academia definitely doesn't help. I am back. Recording. Was on travel last week, but I'm back now. And I want to talk about something a little bit more cerebral. So I'm going to try and tie a few things together in talking about a topic, and it's going to build off of this graphic on Twitter that caught my attention. And lest you think it's a fake or anything like that, it is not, actually. I did my due diligence and looked very carefully at the sources. It turns out that the creator of this graphic, apparently not the author of the tweet, but the creator of the graphic, actually did very much their due diligence in pulling out the data from the sources in the graphic, which I can scroll down and you can see them actually right here. The two sources here, they're not the best, and actually the author insisted the sources be listed. So I will make that point for you, that you can go find this, because as always, this kind of stuff will be linked in the description for you. But I want to talk about this and link it into concerns when it comes to the future of science. But before we begin, and before I forget, if you are not a member of Wokescreen as yet, you should be. Wokescreen is pretty dang freaking awesome. Where you can find a lot of things in the store for sale. You can get into all sorts of great stuff with the Dead Drop Dialect, the editorial, the crowdsource, Culture Jam is coming, and special things to sell, and also behind the scenes in the community Discord and what have you. So it is a blast of a place. I am a member. You should be a member too. And you can be a member for a bit of a discount if you use my code scrolling at the bottom, ScioSophia. You get 10% off of your membership. So I encourage you to go join. It is a fantastic place with all sorts of great things as we build a little bit more of space for folks who are somewhat disenfranchised and disillusioned with the current state of things. So it is a fun place to be. I admit it, it is a wonderfully fun place to be as Wokescreen. Wokescreen.com, promo code ScioSophia for 10% off your membership. Now back to the video. So this caught my attention while I was away on travel, actually. In that, what you note here is that share of liberals among academics by academic field. And this is a bit of a redux, because I can tell that the 2018 numbers are from a paper where they did basically a ratio of Democrats to Republicans, if you will, rather than, conservatives to liberals or anything like that specifically. So there's a bit of assumptions made here that I can deduce off of this, but it is worth talking about. Now, both of these cases, they both did more than one university. So as much as it might seem like just one university, no. They did many universities in this, 50 or 60 in each one, as far as I could tell, at least, which certainly is small given the number of universities that exist today. It is not for 1970, so there's that kind of thing going on. But herein lies the more fun question. You see things like this where it is demonstrably increasing, and again, feel free to point it out to me otherwise. And yeah, it is certainly the case to be here that maybe in a more liberal direction. There's no data that I've maybe the country as a whole is going in a more liberal direction, I should say. There's nothing to necessarily say that that's the case that I know of, but I could be wrong. So hence the reason I say that. But where I have a concern with this is that, you essentially went from, in 1970, the academics being roughly 50-50 here, to um, to it being dramatically in the other direction by 2018, according to this one particular study. Again, there are others in here, and there are others, and there are different numbers with respect to the changes for different disciplines. Although this is the only one that I found that's been really comprehensive to look at both STEM disciplines as well as other associated disciplines. Associated disciplines with STEM, but also get into some of the social sciences. So admittedly, this is the only one that I've seen that covers all of these kinds of things at once. I could be wrong. Again, I'm going to preface this a lot with that, but I don't want to use this as sort of definitive, look how dramatically different it is, as much as a leaping off point to something that I'm concerned about. And have been for some time with sciences, and it's something for my colleagues in sciences to think about, because I'm more conservative, and I would probably be identified in this graphic in the physics mathematics kind of group. But where I get concerned with something like this is because one of the things that we do in science is you have a very definitive push and pull. It's the whole notion of organized skepticism, right? Where we're willing to have every new claim be checked and challenged by somebody else because, well, we're after the truth as a collective discipline, and hopefully as individuals too. But the point of the organized skepticism is to try and help weed that out. Certainly not perfect. But to weed that out, those things that are based upon just entire biased bullshit, rather than actual analysis and rigorous study and evidence and what have you, you have to have somebody who can see things from perhaps very different perspectives. And so, hence the reason I've remained concerned about viewpoint diversity in different fields and having it respected, which is a meaningful kind of diversity. Or the most meaningful kind of diversity anyway, and having it respected in different fields, but it is not seeming that that's going to be the case. Well, how do I put this? If I'm struggling, because this is somewhat cerebral and thinking about it on the fly. If you have a situation where pretty much everybody in a discipline, or most everybody in the discipline is, I think it was Dwight Eisenhower who said it, if everybody's thinking the same, nobody's thinking. And that is the kind of mindset that I'm in with this, in that if everybody thinks the same about a problem, then nobody's going to notice if there's a fundamental flaw in that argument. And because science has so many things that it does in society, think of medicine, think of infrastructure, think of housing. I eventually want to do a video on like all the great things that have resulted from scientific research. So think of refrigeration, air conditioning, the internet, infrastructure of bridges, skyscrapers, and all that jazz. Planes, flying, cars, all those other kinds of things that are so practical and taken for granted now, are the result of somebody's innovation. So science and engineering have a great, profound influence on society by the pursuit of the truth and the resulting inventions and innovation that come from that. But it must be I don't want to say entirely unfettered, because then you can end up in the situation a la what sparked the Belmont report and the subsequent things for institutional review boards, which was the abuse of the scientific process to the point where you had some very immoral and disgusting things happen. So not utterly unfettered. There has to be some guardrails for that. But if you have it so much ideological conformity, or not even conformity in force per se, but conformity implicitly, where everybody comes from the same worldview, the same way of thinking about things, then I worry that it's going to come with the I worry that it's going to come with a sentiment that on the one hand, you will have everybody thinking about it the same way. You're going to miss a fundamental flaw with important research, and that is going to then be translated into some kind of societal action or policy that will result in serious suffering and problems in society. The only way that you really prevent that at the root is with viewpoint diversity. And so, while I don't necessarily think this graphic is entirely accurate to the change over time, it kind of is emblematic of what I have been concerned about for some time. The other reason I get concerned about it is that the perception, or as I do think it is, the real case that there is so many people in a discipline who think a particular way and hold a particular worldview leads to tremendous distrust. You can work with people who have very much worldview disagreements with you and what have you, but if it comes so much to the point where you basically view folks who are not in your discipline as an other, instead of, I'm trying to figure out what the truth is so I can generally help people, then it becomes an issue with a lack of trust or a drop in trust. And I think that's actually pretty dramatically so. This is from the Pew 2022 poll over the last few years. Following up over the last few years. And obviously it's still super majorities of people who think very highly, either with a lot of confidence or a fair amount of confidence, whereas, not too much and no confidence at all. Don't get me wrong, it is still bloody high. But that's a pretty precipitous drop off in 2 years to have it fall to the same levels as it was effectively in June of 2016, which is to the extent that this poll goes. And there's probably a tremendous number of reasons for that. Don't get me wrong. There are certainly propagandists and people who say very many ill things about scientists and academics that are unwarranted. There is certainly that. But there are also people who see with their own eyes, and particularly the last few years. And this is why I am mindful, and I keep saying to others who are in academic disciplines that we're at a point with social media and with the news media being the way it is, that what you do and you say matters with regards to the trust factor with different disciplines, in that if you're conveying an attitude where someone who disagrees with you is of an ill or of an other or something like that, well, what do you think is going to happen? The prime example of this that comes to mind, and why I think, which is disappointing, but why I think there was a fairly big drop in the trust in medical scientists in particular over the last few years, has been the case of someone like Anthony Fauci, which I don't think he's seen a patient in a very long time. But I think things like regarding himself as being the science, as in that famous clip. Now, granted, yes, that clip was pulled and shared everywhere and what have you. But he had an attitude about it, which didn't come off well. Admittedly, he had to put up with a lot of crap, as a lot of political figures do. He doesn't want to call himself a political person, but he probably is. But he was not received very well by some of his attitude and statements toward people who were asking him questions. And it didn't work well. Now, he is a very famous case example, and his case is complicated, which is what I was trying to say. His case is quite complicated, though I frankly do not have a whole lot of trust in folks like Anthony Fauci. Doesn't mean I don't have a lot of trust in scientists. This is where we get to the discernment. Folks can have, tremendous amount of distrust in a particular scientist and think they're doing their job poorly and still trust science and other scientists. Same kind of thing with medicine, with military, with doctors and what like, with police officers and the like. But this is where it becomes concerning, because if there is no trust, and if there is a tremendous drop off in trust, which I mean, if this continues, it would be last year, December 2022. If this continued in a precipitous drop off, it would be getting close to 50-50 on whether or not you trusted scientists. Now again, this is one poll. I'm just using this to illustrate a point. But that is the thing in that there is something to be said for having no ideological diversity to the point where it probably seems like you wouldn't have a conservative in a field. Whether that's true or not, different thing. But if that perception is there, I can understand why the trust would drop. But more to the point, if there is a lot of ideology in one direction, and for whatever reason, a heck of a lot more liberals than conservatives, or more to the point, progressives, than anything else, then it does present a long-term problem for science as a discipline. Not to say that these numbers are necessarily correct, but just in the idea, because over time that has generally been the trend of increasing percentage of liberals, progressives to conservatives, libertarians in the academics. But the question, of course, is, as more of this kind of ideology comes in, it becomes second nature to think, oh, yeah, we can do DEI statements. We can do this, we can do that, with no internal pushback, because the number of people who might see the problem and the flaws with that are very small. And at times very scared to speak out. But it's not seen as biased because, well, we all somewhat think the same way. No one's there to point it out to you that it's a problem. And that's when we come to situations like this. This is from August 2023. It's a letter to the newsletter of the American Mathematical Society. Not the American Meteorological Society, by the way, which is just a point to take there. But my point with this and reading this article now, this letter now, is when there is such ideological uniformity. I don't want to say conformity, because, you could be just drifting in that direction. Again, not making a statement on why exactly, but if there is such that kind of push in that direction, there are so few of a different viewpoint to point out some of the biases and problems with these things, and to make sure we're getting at the truth and not just pushing towards an ideological narrative, which is not the purpose of science. The purpose of science is getting at the truth, and mathematics is a branch of science, actually. Anyway, it can lead to lots of problems, and in this case, this is an example. Start putting things together, but don't think of anything else. Leaving the AMS. In 2022, having been a member of AMS for more than 30 years, Mathematical Society, by the way, I decided not to renew my membership for another year. Here are the reasons. With grave concern, I see the growing use of DEI statements as a required component for job applications, in particular in mathematical sciences. In my opinion, it has an enormous corrosive effect on the math community and education in this country. Even if one is required to say, quote, I passionately believe that water would certainly wet us as fire would certainly burn, end quote, the routine affirmation of one's beliefs as a precondition of making a living constitute compelled speech and corrupts everyone who participates in the performance. Now, DEI statements, I agree with him on that. It amounts to an ideological statement and potentially compelled speech if somebody has to go through with that in order to get a position. So I very much agree with the sentiment. I grew up in the Soviet Union, where people had to affirm their fealty to ideals and the leaders embodying those ideals on a daily basis. As years went by, I observed the remarkable ease with which passionate communists turned into passionate pro-Western liberals and then into passionate nationalists. This lived experience, and also, I hate the phrase lived experience, but anyway, this experience and also common sense convinced me that only true conformists excel at this game. Do we really want our math departments to be populated by conformists? Currently, the compelled speech of the compulsory DEI statements affects mostly people at the beginning of their careers. This is when they are most vulnerable. The sheer logic of bureaucratic expansion suggests that those who position themselves as experts in evaluating the merits and judging the sincerity of DEI statements will find new venues to apply their skills, affecting other demographics. The AMS does nothing to investigate these developments. About 25 years ago, when one of the universities decided to close its PhD program in math, the AMS saw it urgent enough to dispatch a fact-finding mission. Now, as we have a social experiment on a national scale with potentially devastating consequences, the AMS demonstrates a remarkable lack of curiosity. I can think of several reasons for this detachment. First, it can be that the majority of members see nothing wrong in DEI statements or consider them a welcome development. I, for one, would be interested to find out if this indeed were the case. A couple of years ago, several letters were circulated and published that painted an inconclusive, to say the least, picture. As far as I can tell, the discussion ended having barely started. Wouldn't it be more useful to have it restarted now that we have seen more results of the DEI proliferation? Second, I anticipate the argument that AMS is, quote, not involved in politics. But this kind of politics that, rephrasing Pericles, will get involved with you, whether you like. But this is a kind of politics that, rephrasing Pericles, will get involved with you, whether you like it or not, and hence inaction is just as political as action. Third, people can simply be afraid to voice their opinions. Admittedly, the line between the second and third reasons is blurred. Actually, I think the line between all of them is blurred, but anyway. The fears of being accused of having certain pernicious attitudes and creating an unsafe environment, as well as losing one's livelihood, are not without merit. However, compared to the standards set by the totalitarian movements of the past, these repercussions may not seem like such a big deal. The more we are afraid to talk and act now, the more debilitating the fear becomes, and the more devastating will be the effect of inaction. So, I actually think a combination of first and third, because it could be, in this case, that per the growth in the number of, in the share of liberal to conservative in a field, the majority do see nothing wrong with it. The other could very well be that little bit that's left is just scared, which is not a good thing at all. And so I cannot say I blame this guy for resigning, though I don't think it's helpful, because being forced out doesn't make anything, leaving doesn't necessarily make anything better and improve that situation. But that is the question I ask. If the majority just saw nothing wrong, were there enough people there with a diversity of thought that could even point out that there was something wrong? In other words, is the American Mathematical Society and many others now that are engaging with this, along with universities, doing something that is, shall we say, blind? They're ideologically blind to any problems because they don't have enough people who think about it differently. Hence the reason why the growth of one particular ideology in an institution over another is not good for science. It's certainly not good for scientific societies, because you get into this kind of experimentation with no way to check your biases, no way to figure out what the truth is. No way to figure out what the truth is, but you're not going to be able to tell necessarily between something that's, I'm not sure how I exactly want to say what I want to say, but the basic notion here is that you have no way to check your biases. So things can be put forward to be, objective research and what have you, when they're really just biased, narrative-driven bullcrap. And the result is more shitty science, as it were. And the result of more shitty science is perhaps a more precipitous drop-off in public trust in science. And hence the reason I've been concerned about this for a long, long time. And the postmodernist woke crap in academia definitely doesn't help. Anyway, let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everybody.